The American Old West's myth of the invincible gunslinger often crumbles under scrutiny. But for men like Curly Bill Brocius and Clay Allison, the frontier's chaos genuinely forged deadly reputations, though not always through the heroic quick-draw duels Hollywood loves. The frontier's blurred moral lines and personal volatility produced outlaws who were as much products of circumstance as choice, turning minor players into legends of terror. Curly Bill Brocius, his thick black curls a visual signature, rose to prominence among the cowboys after Old Man Clanton's death, effectively becoming a leading figure in Arizona's rustling and border raiding network. This loose confederation thrived on the Arizona Territory's weak enforcement, exploiting cattle theft and cross-border chaos for profit and power. Brocius briefly crossed into legitimacy by collecting taxes for Sheriff John Behan, illustrating how fluid allegiances were. Today's deputy could be tomorrow's outlaw, driven by opportunity rather than ideology. His heavy drinking amplified his already imposing presence, culminating in the accidental shooting of Marshal Fred White in 1880. White himself, on his deathbed, insisted it was unintentional, a rare admission that spared Brocius conviction after Wyatt Earp's testimony in his defense. Yet months later, during Earp's vendetta ride following Morgan Earp's assassination, the two clashed at Iron Springs, now Mescal Springs, in March 1882. Earp's posse surprised Brocius and others. Earp claimed to have killed him with a shotgun blast to the abdomen. Contemporary diarist George Parsons had already dubbed Brocius Arizona dynamics rather than cinematic showdowns. Clay Allison embodied a different peril, a Confederate veteran whose service ended abruptly with a medical discharge after a childhood head injury triggered erratic, partly epileptic, and partly maniacal episodes. This neurological damage, evident in mood swings and extreme violence, especially under alcohol, fueled his unpredictable reputation across Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado. He survived multiple gunfights and knife fights, participated in vigilante lynchings, and earned infamy through dramatic confrontations, including alleged decapitations and saloon brawls. His actions stemmed not from calculated outlaw ambition, but from his 1874 dinner with Chunk Colbert at the Clifton House Inn crystallized this lethal mix of hospitality and homicide. Colbert, nursing a grudge after Allison had previously beaten his uncle, a ferry operator, and possibly seeking to boost his own reputation, spent the day racing horses, drinking, and gambling with Allison before suggesting they eat together, setting the stage for an ambush. As they dined, Colbert drew his pistol from beneath the table, but the barrel snagged, spoiling his shot. Allison responded instantly with a fatal headshot. His later quip, "I wouldn't want to send a man to hell on an empty stomach," revealed a grim, self-justifying humor that framed killing as a practical courtesy rather than sadism. Allison's violent life ended in mundane tragedy in 1887. At age 46, he fell from a loaded supply wagon near Pecos, Texas. A wheel rolled over his neck, breaking it instantly. His gravestone's inscription, "Gentleman Gunfighter," followed by the later added claim, "He never killed a man that did not need killing," attempted to recast a career of erratic, often excessive violence. Sam Bass began with genuine ambition, escaping an abusive uncle, laboring in Mississippi sawmills, then heading to Texas to become a cowboy. But economic frustration and frontier temptation derailed him fast. In 1876, he partnered with Joel Collins to drive longhorns north for profit. After earning roughly $8,000, they absconded with the money instead of repaying the herd's owners. The pair blew at gambling in Deadwood, then turned to crime. 7 low-yield stagecoach robberies led to their most infamous act, the September 18, 1877, holdup of the Union Pacific number. 4 train at Big Springs, Nebraska. The gang seized over $60,000 in freshly minted $20 gold pieces, the single largest robbery in the railroad's history, exploiting the era's reliance on vulnerable rail shipments. Bass's run ended July 19, 1878, in Round Rock, Texas, during a failed bank robbery. Shot in the back and lungs, he died 2 days later on his 27th birthday. The enduring ballad myth paints Bass as a Robin Hood who stole from the rich to aid the poor, yet every contemporary record shows the gang divided the spoils among themselves with no charitable redistribution. His descent into outlawry stemmed from greed, bad judgment, and the allure of quick wealth, not ideology. Number 12. Jim Miller, Outlaw. Deacon Jim. Miller cultivated an image of devout respectability, regular church attendance, abstinence from alcohol and tobacco, polite demeanor that concealed one of the Old West's most prolific and methodical contract killers. He reportedly advertised his services openly, willing to eliminate anyone for fees ranging from $150 to $2,000. Enormous sums then, turning murder into a professional transaction rather than personal vendetta. His hallmark was stealth, striking at night in a black frock coat that melted into shadows, with a steel breastplate concealed underneath as early body armor. This plate famously deflected multiple bullets when rival lawman Bud Fraser emptied his revolver into Miller's chest at point-blank range in 1894. Miller rose unharmed and later killed Fraser in revenge. The combination of pious facade and armored ambush tactics made him extraordinarily effective and feared across Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. A common oversimplification labels Miller a remorseless psychopath, but his consistent church-going and outward civility point to deliberate compartmentalization. He weaponized religion and respectability to gain trust in small towns, lowering suspicion and allowing him to operate undetected far longer than flashier outlaws. These three, Allison's volatile impulses, Bass's greedy escalation, Miller's calculated professionalism, illustrate the Old West's unforgiving equation. Bold moves could build legend, but the same environment that enabled them usually delivered swift, often anticlimactic justice. Number 11. The Sundance Kid. The romantic image of the Old West gunslinger as a fearless killer often overshadows the reality that many legends were built on robbery, evasion, and mystery, rather than confirmed body counts. Nowhere is this clearer than with the Sundance Kid, whose reputation as a deadly shootist rests almost entirely on association rather than evidence. Born Henry Longabaugh, he earned the nickname Sundance Kid after his 1887 conviction and 18-month imprisonment for horse theft in Sundance, Wyoming, a relatively minor offense that marked his entry into serious crime. Contrary to Hollywood portrayals, no reliable historical record confirms he ever killed anyone. His feared status stemmed from his calm demeanor, sharpshooting skill, and role in the Wild Bunch, also called the Hole-in-the-Wall Gang. After release in 1896, he joined forces with Robert Leroy Parker, Butch Cassidy, and the duo led one of the most successful strings of train and bank robberies in U.S. history, hitting targets across the West with military-like planning, splitting large hauls, and repeatedly outrunning posses. As Pinkerton detectives tightened the net in the late 1890s, Sundance, Cassidy, and companion Etta Place fled to Argentina in 1901, living quietly as ranchers under aliases until resuming robberies in South America. Official accounts claim both men died in a 1908 shootout with Bolivian police in San Vicente after a payroll robbery. But persistent rumors and family claims insist Sundance survived, returned to the United States, and lived quietly as William Henry Long in Hiram, or nearby areas, Utah, until dying in 1936 at age 69. 10. Belle Starr. Belle Starr, the so-called Bandit Queen, stands as one of the few women elevated to Old West outlaw icon status, yet her story reveals less about female criminal masterminds and more about how family ties, frontier hardship, and association with famous outlaws could transform a musically talented young woman into a symbol of rebellion. Born Myra Maybelle Shirley in 1848 near Carthage, Missouri, she received a solid education at the Carthage Female Academy, where she excelled academically and became a skilled classical pianist, hardly the profile of a future desperado. Growing up, she knew Cole Younger of the James Younger Gang as a neighbor and later developed connections to Jesse and Frank James, whose gang frequently used the Shirley family farm as a hideout during and after the Civil War. This constant exposure to wanted men normalized outlaw life. In 1866, she married Jim Reed, a former Confederate guerrilla turned farmer. When legitimate farming failed amid post-war poverty and Reconstruction pressures, Reed drifted into horse theft with the Starr family, a Cherokee clan notorious for rustling, and collaborated with the James and Younger brothers on several planned robberies. Reed's criminal career ended violently in 1874 when he was shot dead by lawmen while resisting arrest after a stagecoach robbery. Belle, widowed with children, soon remarried to Sam Starr from the horse-thieving clan and continued associating with rustlers, earning her the nickname Belle Starr, Bandit Queen, through dime novels that exaggerated her role, portraying her as a pistol-packing leader rather than a facilitator and occasional participant in thefts. Number 9. Bill Doolin. The Old West produced countless cowboys who turned outlaw when honest ranch work couldn't compete with the quick money of robbery. But Bill Doolin's path stands out as a textbook case of gradual drift. A trusted, literate foreman who built skills and connections on legitimate ranches, only to channel them into one of the era's most organized and prolific bandit gangs. Born William M. Doolin in 1858 in Johnson County, Arkansas, he headed west in his early 20s, seeking opportunity. By 1881, he landed steady work as a cowboy on the H.X. Bar Ranch along the Cimarron River in Indian Territory. Owner Oscar Halsall recognized his potential, teaching him to read, write, and handle basic math, rare advantages for the time, and eventually promoted him to informal foreman. For nearly a decade, Doolin earned a solid reputation as reliable and capable while working various ranches, during which he crossed paths with future outlaws like George Bitter Creek Newcomb, Charlie Pierce, Bill Power, Dick Broadwell, Tulsa Jack Blake, Dynamite Dick Clifton, and Emmett Dalton. These connections proved fateful. Around 1891 to 1892, Doolin shifted fully to crime, founding what became known as the Doolin-Dalton Gang, or simply the Wild Bunch in some accounts, distinct from Butch Cassidy's later group. The gang specialized in high-value bank, train, and stagecoach robberies across Arkansas, Kansas, Indian Territory, Oklahoma, and beyond during the early 1890s, pulling off dozens of successful hits with disciplined planning. On July 5, 1896, Doolin, Dynamite Dick, and a dozen others staged a bold mass escape from the federal jail in Guthrie, Oklahoma. Doolin went into hiding in Lawson, Oklahoma, with his wife, while the others dispersed. His freedom lasted barely 6 weeks. On August 24, 1896, Deputy U.S. Marshal Heck Thomas, known for his relentless pursuit of outlaws, tracked Doolin to a farmhouse near Lawson. When Doolin refused to surrender and reached for his gun, Thomas shot him dead. The body was publicly displayed in Guthrie for identification, photographed, images sold as postcards, and accompanied by a memorial poem written by Doolin's widow and her brothers to raise funds for burial. The government ultimately covered embalming and interment in Guthrie's Summit View Cemetery, Boot Hill section. His widow's $50,000 wrongful death lawsuit against the marshals was dismissed in February 1897. A common oversimplification portrays Doolin as a cold-blooded killer who founded the gang purely for violence, but records show he avoided unnecessary bloodshed when possible. His gang's robberies emphasized speed and escape over shootouts. He earned respect even among lawmen for his intelligence and relative restraint compared to more trigger-happy contemporaries like the Daltons. Number 8. Cherokee Bill. The Indian Territory in the 1890s was a volatile pressure cooker of tribal lands, federal jurisdiction gaps, and young men with guns and grudges, conditions that allowed figures like Crawford Goldsby, better known as Cherokee Bill, to rack up a terrifying body count and notoriety at an astonishingly young age. Born Crawford Goldsby in 1876 to a black father and Cherokee mother, he grew up in the Cherokee Nation amid post-Civil War tensions. By his late teens, he had formed a small gang that terrorized the territory for over 2 years, roughly 1894 to 1895, committing armed robberies, stage holdups, and at least 8 confirmed killings, including his own brother-in-law, in a domestic dispute. His reputation spread rapidly through newspapers and word of mouth as one of the most dangerous young outlaws in the region. Captured in 1895, he endured a 3-day trial in Fort Smith before the infamous hanging judge Isaac C. Parker, who sentenced him to death by hanging on September 10, 1895. An appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court briefly delayed matters, but the court affirmed the conviction on December 2, 1895. Parker rescheduled the execution for March 17, 1896. At age 20, Goldsby stepped to the gallows before a large crowd and delivered the terse final words, "I came here to die, not to make a speech." His mother claimed the body for burial in the Cherokee National Cemetery near Fort Gibson. A persistent myth exaggerates Cherokee Bill as a cold, remorseless killer who murdered indiscriminately for sport, but contemporary records tie many of his killings to personal feuds, revenge, or the chaos of robbery gone wrong, typical of the era's volatile mix of racial tensions, family disputes, and economic desperation, rather than pure sadism. His youth and mixed-race background also fueled sensationalized coverage that amplified his legend beyond the facts. Number 7. Doc Holliday. Doc Holliday endures as one of the Old West's most romanticized anti-heroes, a consumptive dentist who traded forceps for faro cards and loyalty to Wyatt Earp for a place in frontier folklore. But his legend often inflates a life of calculated survival, gambling, and selective violence into something far bloodier than the evidence supports. Born John Henry Holliday. In 1851 in Griffin, Georgia, he graduated from the Pennsylvania College of Dental Surgery in 1872 at age 20 and opened a practice, only to be diagnosed soon after with tuberculosis, the same disease that killed his mother, whom he nursed, and sister. Seeking the drier climate believed to slow the illness, he headed west in 1873, where gambling offered income without the physical demands of dentistry. He built a reputation as a skilled faro dealer and occasional troublemaker, drifting through Texas saloons. In 1877 or 1878, he reportedly intervened in a saloon dispute to save Wyatt Earp's life, forging a deep friendship rooted in mutual respect for competence under pressure. By 1879, Holliday followed Earp through Las Vegas, New Mexico, Prescott, Arizona, and finally Tombstone in 1880. There, he became a lightning rod for the Cochise County Cowboys, a loose rustling network who accused him of stagecoach robbery and repeatedly threatened him. On October 26, 1881, City Marshal Virgil Earp swore him in as a special deputy for the day, placing Holliday at the center of the OK Corral gunfight. Modern scholarship estimates Holliday killed between 1 and 3 men in documented incidents, far fewer than the 12 to 15 often claimed in old dime novels and early films, with most confrontations resolved through intimidation or quick draws rather than mass slaughter. The inflated body count was a product of sensational journalism and Hollywood's need for a deadlier archetype. These figures, Clifton's last stand, Cherokee Bill's youthful rampage, and Holliday's calculated allegiance, underscore the Old West's closing chapter. As federal marshals and judges tightened control, the window for unchecked outlawry slammed shut, leaving only echoes of daring, desperation, and abrupt ends. The brief 30-second shootout near the OK Corral left 3 cowboys dead and the Earps and Holliday largely unscathed, though Virgil was grazed. Retaliation came swiftly. In December 1881, Virgil Earp was ambushed and crippled by shotgun fire from hidden assailants. In March 1882, Morgan Earp was murdered while playing billiards. Frustrated by local courts' inaction and perceived corruption favoring the cowboys, Wyatt, now a deputy U.S. Marshal, assembled a federal posse that included Holliday. They tracked and killed Frank Stillwell at the Tucson train station on March 20, 1882, as he waited in ambush. Earp shot him multiple times at close range. This act triggered arrest warrants from local authorities for Wyatt, Holliday, and 3 others. Over the next weeks, the posse killed at least 3 more suspected cowboys before fleeing to New Mexico territory. When extradition efforts targeted Holliday in Colorado, Wyatt successfully lobbied Governor Frederick Walker Pitkin to refuse it, citing jurisdictional issues and Holliday's poor health, allowing him to evade trial. Holliday spent his remaining years in Leadville and other Colorado towns, gambling when he could muster the strength, his tuberculosis worsening steadily. On November 8, 1887, at age 36, he died in bed at the Hotel Glenwood in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Number 6. Tom Horn. Tom Horn represents the shadowy transition from frontier lawlessness to the corporate West, a skilled scout and tracker who started as a range detective but ended as a scapegoat for powerful interests, his execution raising enduring questions about justice when cattle barons and miners wielded influence over courts and posses. Born Thomas Horn, Jr. In 1860 in Missouri, he drifted west young and first rose to notice during the 1878 Lincoln County War in New Mexico, where he reportedly rode as a hired gun for cattle baron John Chisholm's side against the Murphy-Doolin faction. His cool-headed marksmanship and reliability earned him the nickname Tommy and Steady Work. By the 1880s, he joined the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, pursuing train robbers, rustlers, and outlaws with methods that often skirted legal boundaries, earning admiration from employers but suspicion from communities who saw him as a corporate assassin. In the 1890s, he worked as a range detective for the Wyoming Stock Growers Association and mining companies, targeting rustlers and suspected union organizers during labor wars. He was credited, and sometimes boasted, of eliminating threats with long-range rifle shots, though he rarely faced open trials. His downfall came in 1901 with the ambush murder of 14-year-old Willie Nickel, son of a sheepman, in a bitter cattle-sheep range dispute in Wyoming. Horn was arrested, tried in 1903 on circumstantial evidence, a disputed confession to a detective, ballistic links, and his proximity, and convicted despite widespread doubts about the proof and suggestions he was framed to appease public anger over range violence. He was hanged in Cheyenne on November 20, 1903, at age 42, maintaining his innocence to the end. Many historians still debate his guilt, citing weak forensics, possible alternative suspects, and the political pressure on authorities to close the case. One persistent oversimplification paints Horn as a cold-blooded serial killer who murdered indiscriminately for pay. Butch Cassidy. Butch Cassidy, born Robert Leroy Parker, embodies the last great flourish of classic Old West outlawry, a charismatic, nonviolent, by preference, bank and train robber whose Wild Bunch gang pulled off sophisticated heists with military precision, turning crime into a brief, profitable enterprise before the telegraph, railroads, and Pinkertons made escape impossible. Butch Cassidy's early life reads like a textbook origin story for the gentleman outlaw, a bright, likable Mormon farm boy whose path veered toward crime not through desperation, but through a mix of youthful mischief, mentor influence, and the irresistible pull of easy money in a frontier still wide open to bold operators. In 1879, at age 13, Robert Leroy Parker lived with his family on Jim Marshall's ranch near Circleville, Utah, where he formed a pivotal friendship with Mike Cassidy, an older cowboy and sometime rustler. Mike gifted the boy his first gun and taught him marksmanship and riding skills, lessons that stuck. Years later, Bob adopted Cassidy as his alias in tribute. His first legal trouble came around 1884, finding a closed clothing store in Sundance, Wyoming, or nearby. He broke in, took a pair of overalls and some pies, and left a note promising repayment, an act so cheeky the judge dismissed charges after the owner was reimbursed. This incident foreshadowed the charm and nonviolent audacity that defined him. By June 24, 1889, Cassidy had escalated. With 3 accomplices, he robbed the San Miguel Valley Bank in Telluride, Colorado, netting about $21,000, a massive haul then. He used part of the proceeds to buy a ranch near the Hole in the Wall, Wyoming, a rugged outlaw sanctuary, widely seen as a front for planning and hiding rather than genuine ranching. In the mid-1890s, he assumed leadership of the Wild Bunch, also called the Hole in the Wall Gang, assembling a loose but highly effective crew including Harry Longabaugh, the Sundance Kid, Harvey Logan, Kid Curry, Ben Kilpatrick, and others. They specialized in meticulously planned train and bank robberies across the West, often using dynamite on express cars, splitting large sums fairly, and vanishing into remote hideouts. Like Sundance, Cassidy's end remains clouded in mystery. Official reports state he and Sundance died in a 1908 shootout with Bolivian authorities in San Vicente after a payroll robbery. Yet persistent family claims, especially from relatives in Utah, insist he survived, returned secretly to the United States under an alias, and lived quietly until the 1930s, fueling one of the West's greatest survival myths, though no conclusive evidence has emerged. A common oversimplification casts Cassidy as a trigger-happy killer, but records show he actively avoided unnecessary bloodshed. His gang's robberies emphasized speed, intimidation, and escape. Confirmed killings by Cassidy himself are rare or absent, with most violence coming from hotter-headed members like Kid Curry. Number 4. Thomas Coleman Cole. Younger Cole Younger's trajectory from Confederate guerrilla to post-war bank robber to redeemed ex-convict captures the Old West's deepest irony. Many outlaws were not born criminals, but products of wartime trauma, Reconstruction bitterness, and the economic chaos that turned skilled fighters into desperate bandits. Born in 1844 in Lee's Summit, Missouri, Cole's path darkened after his father's 1862 murder during a confrontation with Union Captain Wally, who allegedly harassed Cole's sister. Already riding with William Quantrill's Confederate guerrillas, notorious for the Lawrence Massacre, Cole joined the regular Confederate Army and fought through the war's end. Defeat and Reconstruction hardships radicalized him further. His first major crime linked to him was the 1868 robbery of Nimrod Long and Company, bank in Russellville, Kentucky. Soon after, he, brothers Jim and Bob, allied with Jesse and Frank James to form the James Younger Gang, one of the most feared outfits of the era, hitting banks, trains, and stagecoaches across Missouri, Kentucky, Kansas, and West Virginia, with hit-and-run precision born of wartime experience. Their run ended catastrophically on September 7, 1876, during a botched raid on the First National Bank in Northfield, Minnesota. Townspeople and militia fought back fiercely. The gang was routed, Cole and his brothers captured, badly wounded, and the James brothers escaped. To avoid hanging, Cole, Jim, and Bob pleaded guilty to murder and were sentenced to life at Minnesota's Stillwater Prison. After 25 years, Cole was paroled in 1901. Jim had died in prison, Bob earlier. In freedom, he pursued redemption, touring with Frank James in a Wild West lecture show recounting their exploits, carefully sanitized, converting to Christianity, renouncing violence, and living quietly until his death in 1916 at age 72, still carrying 11 unremoved bullets from old wounds as permanent souvenirs. One persistent myth romanticizes the James Younger Gang as Robin Hood figures who robbed the rich, especially railroads and banks, to aid the poor, but contemporary evidence shows the loot was kept for personal use or gang expenses. Their crimes were driven by revenge against perceived Yankee oppressors, thrill, and profit, not social justice. Number 3. Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid, born Henry McCarty, also known as William H. Bonney, remains the quintessential young gunslinger of Old West legend. A quick-drawing orphan whose brief, violent life in the Lincoln County War became the template for countless dime novels, films, and ballads celebrating or condemning youthful rebellion. Billy the Kid's enduring fame as the ultimate teenage desperado owes more to sensational newspapers, dime novels, and Hollywood than to verifiable deeds. Yet beneath the myth lies a sharp, charismatic young drifter whose brief life was shaped less by innate criminality and more by loyalty, betrayal, and the brutal factional violence of the New Mexico frontier. Popular legend insists Billy killed 21 men, one for each year of his short life. But careful historical analysis, court records, coroner's inquests, eyewitness statements, attributes only 4 confirmed killings to him, with perhaps a couple more probable but unproven. Those who knew him, ranchers, fellow regulators, even some lawmen, described a quick-witted, good-humored youth who was brave in a fight, loyal to friends, and more prankster than psychopath. Under stable conditions, many believed he could have become a respected rancher or lawman. In 1877, at around 17, he took steady work as a cattle guard for English rancher John Tunstall in Lincoln County, New Mexico. Tunstall's growing business threatened the economic monopoly held by Lawrence Murphy and James Doolin, who controlled local supply contracts, courts, and politics through bribes and influence. On February 18, 1878, Tunstall, unarmed and riding alone, was ambushed and murdered by a posse of Murphy-Doolin men, sparking the Lincoln County War. Outraged, Tunstall's employees, including Billy, were deputized by Justice of the Peace John Wilson to arrest the killers. They formed the Regulators, but Governor Lew Wallace and territorial officials backed the Murphy-Doolin faction, declaring the Regulators outlaws. The conflict evolved into ambushes, jailbreaks. Billy famously escaped Lincoln Jail in April 1881 by killing 2 guards, and running battles. After nearly 3 years on the run, Sheriff Pat Garrett, once an acquaintance, tracked Billy to Pete Maxwell's ranch in Fort Sumner on July 14, 1881. Entering a darkened room, Garrett shot and killed the 21-year-old when Billy, armed and suspicious, demanded, "Queen-ess, who is it?" A persistent myth claims Billy survived and lived under aliases, with imposters like Brushy Bill Roberts surfacing in the 1940s to 1950s. But forensic evidence, contemporary photos, and family records overwhelmingly confirm Garrett's kill. Survival rumors were fueled by romantic wishful thinking and the era's poor record-keeping. Number 2. Jesse James. Jesse James stands as the archetypal post-war outlaw whose life bridged guerrilla warfare and organized bank robbery. Yet his legend as a Confederate Robin Hood, robbing the rich to aid the oppressed, crumbles under scrutiny, revealing instead a calculating bandit whose crimes were driven by resentment, profit, and the thrill of defiance against a victorious North. Born Jesse Woodson James in September 1847 in Clay County, Missouri, he grew up amid the violent border conflicts between pro-slavery Missourians and abolitionist Kansans. During the Civil War, Jesse and brother Frank joined William Quantrill's and Bloody Bill Anderson's pro-Confederate guerrillas, bushwhackers, participating in savage raids, including the 1864 Centralia Massacre, where they executed unarmed Union soldiers and civilians. Defeat in 1865 left the James brothers embittered by Reconstruction policies, property losses, and perceived Yankee oppression. By 1866, they allied with the Younger brothers, Cole, Jim, Bob, to form the James Younger Gang, launching a string of bank, train, and stagecoach robberies across Missouri, Kentucky, Kansas, Iowa, and West Virginia, often targeting institutions seen as symbols of Northern finance. Legends attribute at least 17 killings to Jesse personally, but historians estimate the number closer to 7 to 10, many during robberies or escapes, with exaggeration common in both pro- and anti-James accounts. The gang's run ended April 3, 1882, when new member Robert Ford, seeking the $10,000 reward and amnesty, shot Jesse in the back of the head while he stood on a chair adjusting a picture in his St. Joseph, Missouri home. Ford's treachery, followed by his own quick trial and pardon, later revoked, turned Jesse into an instant martyr for some and a cautionary tale for others. A widespread myth portrays Jesse as a heroic avenger who stole from railroads and banks to help poor farmers and ex-Confederates. But records show the gang kept nearly all proceeds for themselves, with little evidence of redistribution. Their targets were chosen for maximum profit and symbolic impact, not social justice, and many victims were ordinary citizens caught in crossfire or bank employees. Number 1. John Wesley Hardin. John Wesley Hardin stands as perhaps the deadliest and most polarizing figure in Old West gunfighter lore. A preacher's son whose name evoked Methodist piety, yet whose trigger finger claimed more confirmed lives than almost any contemporary, turning personal slights and Reconstruction-era tensions into a trail of bodies that blurred self-defense, revenge, and cold-blooded murder. Born in 1853 in Bonham, Texas, to a Methodist preacher father, named after John Wesley, founder of Methodism, Hardin showed early volatility. At 14, he stabbed a schoolmate who bullied him during a wrestling match, surviving but marking the start of a pattern. In 1868, at 15, while playfully wrestling an emancipated black man named Mage, or Major, Hardin scratched Mage's face. The next day, Mage ambushed him on a road. Hardin fired 3 warning shots into the air, then, when Mage continued advancing, shot him dead in claimed self-defense. Fearing biased Reconstruction courts, where many Texas state police were formerly enslaved, and Hardin was seen as a defiant ex-Confederate youth, he fled rather than face trial. When officers tracked him, his brother Joe warned him. Instead of running, Hardin ambushed and killed 3 state policemen in a gunfight near his home, then escaped. Over the next decade, he drifted through Texas, Kansas, and Florida, racking up at least 20 to 27 confirmed killings. Some historians argue up to 40, though many remain disputed. In 1871, he reached Abilene, Kansas, where he briefly befriended Marshal Wild Bill Hickok. Staying at the American House Hotel, irritated by a stranger's loud snoring in the adjacent room, Hardin fired 2 shots upward through the ceiling. The first woke the man. The second killed him. Hardin escaped out the window and rode back to Texas to avoid Hickok's wrath. Years of running, shootouts, and narrow escapes followed until his 1877 arrest in Pensacola, Florida. Convicted of second-degree murder in one prominent case, he received a 25-year sentence, served 16 years in Huntsville prison. Remarkably, while incarcerated, he studied law, passed the bar exam, and practiced as an attorney after parole in 1894. His violent life ended July 19, 1895, in El Paso. While rolling dice in the Acme Saloon, Constable John Selman shot him in the back of the head, apparently over a personal dispute or to collect a reward, killing the 42-year-old instantly. A widespread myth claims Hardin was a remorseless psychopath who killed indiscriminately for sport. But his own autobiography, written in prison, and contemporary accounts show many incidents began as perceived threats, barroom quarrels, or self-defense amid Reconstruction chaos. He often spared lives when possible and framed himself as a victim of unfair authority, though his quick resort to lethal force far exceeded necessity in most cases. The Old West's gunslingers, from Curly Bill's chaotic rustling to Hardin's lethal hair trigger, were rarely pure heroes or villains, but men shaped by a lawless borderland where personal honor, economic desperation, wartime grudges, and alcohol collided daily. The frontier rewarded audacity until it didn't. Then it delivered abrupt, often ignominious ends, leaving only stories that still captivate because they feel larger than the messy human truths behind them.